Okay, Dad. So this is it, our first podcast where we will be going over the Duran episodes and just kind of diving in a little bit deeper. So the most recent one that I listened to, but you didn't yet.
Yeah, it's gonna be difficult for me to dive into it at all. I
Okay,
haven't listened
well,
to it.
this one was about revisiting Russiagate and basically what the claim of Alexander McCurse and well, it's actually they revisit the Russiagate narrative. I guess Matt Taibbi along with some other folks they had an article that came out that was saying essentially that the CIA manipulated all the evidence which we're aware of, but that actually Putin preferred Hillary Clinton over Trump,
Uh-huh.
which to me sounds a bit odd.
Uh-huh.
um,
Right.
but are you aware of any of the evidence that points to anything like this?
Um, I think I actually did read that Matt Taibbi article, but I can't remember the details of it. I remember the main points. But it's actually it was just the other day. It seems that Putin said something very similar. He said that he would prefer Biden over Trump,
Right.
and people had trouble believing it. They
He
thought
he's,
he was playing some sort of game or whatever, but I think he was actually telling the truth.
he made that statement a couple weeks ago, right?
Yeah, I think that's right.
Right.
Probably took a couple of weeks ago.
Right. I remember that, and then I believe I think it was it Blinken or was said something. We had a question about that. Said, what do you think about Biden? Says Trump Putin prefers Biden. And I think the response that Blinken gave was simply like, we just tell Russia to stay out of our elections.
Uh-huh.
Which
Just answering a question, that's right.
right, but it kind of makes me also wonder, like, do you think Putin truly would prefer somebody like
Okay.
Biden,
Well,
or
this,
truly prefer
yeah,
someone like Hillary? You know?
right. Well, this is the argument that I've heard, and I think it makes sense that in both cases, um, Putin preferred the Democratic candidate because they were predictable. I mean, he knew, he understood that kind of politician. Yeah, obviously they're very hostile to Russia. He would certainly prefer to have somebody who was friendly to Russia. And though Trump from time to time says things that are that suggests that he doesn't share the general establishment hostility towards Russia, that he might in fact be friendly to Russia. He's also a very unpredictable kind of person. Mark Sleboda calls him a chaos bomb,
Right.
and that is something that a great power. If you're dealing with a great power, you want that great power to be predictable. You can plan accordingly. But if you have somebody like Trump in charge, you just don't know what direction he's going to go in. He may be very aggressive. He may not be. He may be,
Hmm.
friendly one day and hostile the next, and that makes just very difficult for the Russians to plan and prepare.
Do you actually believe that Putin really actually prefers Biden? Because for me, I almost feel like maybe is he playing Putin playing some kind of mind game almost. Because sure, I agree. Trump is chaos. Yeah, he's all over the place. You don't know what he's going to do, but we do know that the Biden administration has this visceral hatred of Russia, and it seems like they're pushing ever closer to a potentially World War III, a larger conflict. NATO is getting, we're getting about as close as we possibly can be involved in this war, this
Right.
conflict, without officially saying we're involved in this war. And that
Yeah.
line keeps on getting pushed with, Macron. What we got, we know that there are American troops there,
Right.
unofficially. There
Right.
are British troops, there are Dutch, there are Germans, there are Swedes and Norwegians. So NATO is clearly heavily involved in here. So if I was Putin, you're looking at it's like, okay, well, I know for certain that this administration is setting out to trying to destroy Russia.
Uh,
But perhaps they know that they have the upper hand. They think, okay, the more that they try to destroy us, Russia, then they're destroying themselves. That's possibly a play. Or because or Putin might be just trying to, throw a little bit of a wrench in the whole in our political system here by saying that he prefers Biden, right? Because Trump said he would end the Ukraine-Russia war in 24 hours. Who
Right.
knows if he can do that?
Yeah. Well,
That's his character. He says
yeah.
stuff like that.
Obviously he can't. I
But
think it's an absurd statement.
but he
Yeah.
obviously seems like he wants an end to a conflict. He wants
Right.
to push for some type of
Right.
negotiated peace settlement.
Right.
Right. Where it's clear that the Democrats don't. So why would
Right. Well, yeah. Yeah, I don't know for sure, but it is possible that he is actually stating his preference. Not so much a personal preference, he may just absolutely loathe, or Clinton and Biden, more than he dislikes, or maybe he doesn't dislike Trump. I don't know. But a statesman puts aside his personal preferences and thinks about what's best for his country, and one thing is he's got to look at Trump's record. Trump, made these positive statements concerning Russia, but when he was in power, relations deteriorated. I mean, that's a fact. They were actually better under Obama than they were under Trump. In spite of what you hear from the Democrats and all this, Russiagate nonsense. The truth is that, for example, under Trump, the American government, the American military, began arming the Ukrainians and violating restrictions that the Obama administration had put in place.
Right.
I mean, the Obama administration was actually much more cautious.
Well, that was the whole Trump impeachment, was that he wasn't doing it quickly enough, right?
Yeah, again, that's absurd. I mean, it's upside down when you look at it. I mean, the fact is that, again, he wasn't any better for Russia. I suppose, and this is I think a comment that Putin's made on several occasions, that it doesn't, like in his most recent interview with Tucker Carlson, that it doesn't really seem to matter who's president. The deep state does what it wants.
Right.
So you have basically the same policies, the same, anti-Russian policies in place, and not really, he probably doesn't see any realistic prospect of that trajectory changing. But then on top of it, you have this very unpredictable character. Now, granted, it's just possible he might turn things in a better direction. But I suppose his reading of it is, Putin's reading of it is that chance is very small, and there's, maybe a greater chance of him pushing the button, so to speak, doing something particularly reckless, and,
right?
Yeah, and dangerous.
Right. Well, I mean, Putin. I mean, if he makes this argument that it doesn't really matter who's in power, it's the deep state. He acknowledges it, and that's something that I think is becoming, more and more, coming to light here in the United States amongst the general population, that there is a deep state that's in control. And you look at Biden, nobody thinks he's really in control.
Yeah.
But then you have the idea is that Trump is supposed to be the anti-deep state. Of course, he was in the past 4 years.
Right.
I guess the argument is that this time around it'll be different if he does get elected.
Right.
But also you have the introduction of some truly anti-deep state candidates. For example, Vivek Ramaswamy. So
Right.
And RFK Jr. So, for example, if Vivek was his running mate, then you have somebody that's truly anti-deep state, then would you could probably make the argument more that would be something that would be preferable to.
Right. I think that would certainly be a signal that, Trump 2.0 is going to be different than the first version of Trump. I mean, he went with very establishment and, frankly, anti-Trumpian people.
John Bolton and
Nikki Haley,
right.
and so forth. Or this awful Secretary of State was, why does his name escape me at the moment? But but anyway, he was just truly terrible and very, very hostile to Russia. And, I suppose the Russians are expecting to see the same thing over again. Now, just every once in a while, or quite frequently, Trump will just throw a curveball. He'll say something that is, generally gets the deep state riled up and makes, the rest of us quite excited. I think like maybe it was yesterday that Viktor Orban revealed that Trump said he wouldn't give another penny to Ukraine.
Mm-hmm.
Now, he said other things at other times, but you hear that and you just wonder, is there really a chance? Maybe,
Yeah.
just I personally become just sort of very cynical and expect to see the same thing all over again. And maybe that's the attitude of the Russian government as well.
Right. It seems to me that Trump is somebody that's very influenced by the people around him.
Yeah.
So if he maybe surrounds himself with the right people, maybe it would, because there would be a change. But he seems to, if you stroke Trump's ego enough, I feel like you can get him to do whatever you want him to do. Maybe that's not fair, but that's kind of my impression of him.
Yeah. Right. Well, I mean, that's. What you're going to get with Biden. It's going to be bad, but you don't know what you're going to get with Trump, and there is a chance that it just might be better. Yeah.
Well, I mean, if you feel like it, yeah, to me it seems like it's hard to get worse than Biden. So it's kind of I'm when I heard Putin say he preferred Biden, my kind of immediate response is like he's playing some kind of game here.
Yeah, well, he might be. I don't know. But there's another possibility, and that is that in spite of all the this terribly destructive policy that the Americans have pursued in Ukraine, under Biden. There are some signs that policy might be changing, and maybe the Russians see that. I'm speaking, specifically the most
Victoria Nuland.
Yeah, the resignation of Victoria Nuland is probably the most important, or kind of the potentially the most significant of these developments. So maybe, just maybe. Biden, they wanted to destroy Russia, and maybe they've recognized they can't do it, and that they're actually wasting their time and and harming their own reputation and destroying Europe, and just maybe they have enough sense to turn away.
Right.
And again, there are some signs that this may indeed be happening.
Right. Well, but I mean, if you look at it, if you take out the rhetoric and the stance, and if you just look at Russia and you look at the United States and Western Europe, NATO, what has happened since Biden took office, we have seen the United States and especially Western Europe, NATO, really in shambles. The politicians are freaking out. Nobody trusts their government anymore. Whereas it's the opposite in Russia. Russia's economy is strengthened. They become more resilient. I think there's more national pride. They feel like they have the upper hand on everything. So if you just look at it, just by the numbers, you'd say, well, things have gotten a lot better for Russia under Biden. So perhaps that's what, they're looking at. It's like, look, Biden keeps on, everything he does backfires. He tries to shoot us, but he's always got the gun pointed backwards and he's blowing it in his own face. So let him keep doing it. Maybe that's what they're possibly thinking.
Yeah, well, again, there are all kinds of possibilities. I can't say that that's not impossible. Yeah, and the truth is that, Putin is supported by 80% of the Russian population, something close to that, and Biden is in the 30s.
Schultz is getting close to single digits now.
Yeah, right. Macron is down in single digits, I believe, already. And
right. Sunak is
same. Right.
Right. So every single Western European country in the United States, I mean, Trudeau's not popular either.
Right.
we're destroying ourselves. And
Right.
Putin's like, well, just keep it up, maybe.
Yeah, but the thing is, I mean, these governments, they're obviously um, not too concerned with public opinion. I mean, especially when it comes to foreign policy, they've pursued their own policies, not because they're responding to some sort of groundswell from the grassroots up, but these are just simply elite preferences and kind of elite obsessions. And they've followed this elite obsession, down this very destructive path in Ukraine. And they've ignored, I think in general the polls, especially recently, have been showing that the Ukraine policy is not popular. Whether it's in the U.S. or in Western Europe, most Western European countries, and they've ignored it. What was it? The foreign minister in Baerbock in Germany, frankly, just said that she didn't care what the people thought this was right and this is what they were going to do. And I think that's been their attitude. But these people do want to be reelected. They can get away with a lot, thanks to the support they get from their, establishment medias, and just kind of like the willingness of voters to just keep on voting for the same people again and again, out of habit or whatever it is.
Right. But that's changing.
The thing is, when you get down in the single digits, you're not going to be reelected.
Right.
And these people are seeing that, and I think they are getting rather nervous. And now it could go different ways, right? It could be like, maybe we see some signs in the U.S. Maybe, I hope it's not completely clear that they're going to maybe moderate their support for Ukraine. But then we have Macron, who's going off in the other direction.
Right.
Decided to be Napoleon or something.
Right. Okay. Well, let me actually take this back just a little bit, just to go from the beginning. Prior to 2015, I feel like there was no real anti-Russian sentiment, at least in mainstream media, or very little that I can remember. It really started with Trump. So
it did precede Trump.
Okay, what were some of the things?
Yeah, well, first of all, it was, certainly it was 2014.
Right.
But even before then, I think that was the Winter Olympics in Sochi. Yeah, that was
2014 as well.
That was 2014, right? But I just remember just kind of this just never-ending scoffing and of the facilities of everything, about the Sochi Olympics, and
that they were subpar.
I mean, it was just sort of like, there's the general attitude is just like, the Russians, they're just like John McCain said, just a
gas station posing as a country,
right? Which is never been true, or but that attitude has been there. I mean, the thing is, you got to remember, it's like from the, things were terrible in the 90s, and Russia was a mess of a country in the 90s. And it took a while for Russia to recover. And I think, too, also among certain elites, there's always been an antipathy towards Russia. It's something that Jeffrey Sachs talks about, that he noticed, because he was an advisor to these governments back in the 90s. And when he asked, for example, for financial aid for Poland, he would get it immediately in 24 hours. Same thing, same kind of situation in Russia. And then he would say, "Oh no, we're not giving it to." And then you find out that there were people who just did not want to help Russia. They saw this was a good chance to kick Russia while it was down. So it was always there. It just wasn't quite so intense or open.
Yeah, right. I guess open is what
right.
I'm saying, because I don't remember it being in the zeitgeist prior to 2015 that much. Of course, the 2014 coup. We also had Georgia was what, 2008?
2008, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and there was sort of a mini anti-Russian hysteria then.
Right. So there was.
But... Yeah, and and the media was. Was entirely complicit in it. Of course, they in dishonestly, describing the conflict that broke out in Georgia in 2008. But I remember back then, actually, like even in the New York Times, they're like 2 months after that
They
event,
corrected it.
they actually corrected it. A lot of people didn't notice it, but so it was possible, and actually it was possible all the way up until maybe 2022 to have, for example, articles about Nazis in Ukraine and so forth. Occasionally, it wasn't entirely, we don't see what we're seeing now when they really, when the war escalated to its new current, level of intensity in 2022, then dissenting voices were completely quelled, were completely eliminated from the mainstream discourse. But up until then, there were some, there was this general hostility, and it was really, yeah, it certainly intensified under Trump. Russiagate fed this anti-Russian hysteria.
Right. Well, that's kind of what I wanted to get at. Is like, what just the origins of Russiagate before, like why Russia? I mean, is it because Trump said a few things that he said, oh, I can work with Putin, or I like him? Is that all it was that it took? Maybe the fact that his daughter was named Ivanka and people like that sounded Russian. I mean,
there wasn't very much, but I mean, I think that shows that there was that the hostility towards Russia pre-existed, or it wouldn't have gained any traction. It wouldn't have even been invented. There was already within the elites, there was this hostility towards Russia, and then of course, it's just this hysteria was unleashed, and it became much more intense. And
but
where we were.
Do you think that there were maybe a few players, people like Victoria Nuland that was working under Hillary Clinton when she was Secretary of State, that she maybe had a personal, agenda against Russia?
I think she always has.
Right, because we can say the elites, always hated Russia, Cold War mentality, etc. But also, there's a lot of hatred towards China, a lot of hatred towards Iran. And you almost think like, could they have equally just chosen one of these other countries, and perhaps it would have been easier because they could play on Trump's xenophobia more, that he's racist and doesn't like Iranians or Chinese or
Well,
so I mean, like, I guess my question is really why Russia? They want all in on Russia, Russiagate, and now it's culminated in what we have now, which is the brink of World War III, and they keep on doubling down on this terrible Russia, evil Russia narrative. Like I said, when Putin said he prefers Biden, the response from the White House is stay out of our elections, Putin. Like they're just still playing this Russiagate thing, even though
they haven't really ever dropped it entirely, even though it was really entirely discredited, during his administration.
Right. So I guess that's so yeah. Well,
it's hard. I mean, it's irrational. It's hard to explain things that are irrational. There's really no good explanation for why people are irrational. In some cases, I think like with Victoria Nuland, her ancestors came from Ukraine. She's Jewish, and there are a lot of Jews in America. Certainly not all of them, but there are a lot that have this kind of a racial memory of.
Especially
for people from that part, from actually Ukraine. Now the funny thing is that he's from Ukraine, but then they describe themselves as being from Russia. Now you can't do that. You're a very evil person, and whatever. But there was a real understanding that this was part of Russia back then. So it actually supports Putin's point of view, but but nobody tries to really expose that contradiction.
But
they think back to the pogroms.
I was going to say. I just watched Fiddler on the Roof. And it's set in that time before the Bolshevik Revolution. And their Jewish communities, and their town was between Kiev and Moscow, or something.
Well, it's the same thing. Like Anthony Blinken's ancestors came from there too, and he claimed that they had suffered in the pogroms, but apparently, according to maybe it was to Putin himself, they actually left before there were any pogroms, because the pogroms were actually in places like Ukraine. They weren't in other parts of Russia, and. How serious they were. Of course, they were cruel and unjust, and a lot of people suffered. They may have been, the scale may have been exaggerated, but even whether or not they're like these particular great grandparents or whatever actually suffered some sort of persecution, there still is this sort of collective memory, that feeds this anti-Russian sentiment among Jews in particular. But then I think also it's just the kind of the old Cold War reflexes. It's just for a long time there's so many people who were just painted, regarded the Soviet Union as the enemy number one. That was, that's their whole world revolved around that. And then it actually, now that Russia is being painted as the evil opponent to the U.S., it actually makes their world makes sense again. They're back to where they were. And that may be something. I don't know how much of an effect that really has. Again, you can point to these factors, and in the end, it still doesn't really explain it. Again, things are irrational. Hatreds are irrational, and you have to kind of admit that they resist analysis.
Okay, well then I guess maybe the final question is, how do you think this all ends? We're going into Russiagate 3.0 is kind of the, what the Duran and this latest podcast kind of ends with, that, and they're just going to rehash this whole Russiagate thing again in this new election. How does that play out? I mean, it seems like it doesn't hold water anymore, right?
Yeah,
It's been...
I don't think it does. It only, it's just among some diehard, Rachel Maddow followers or whatever, but for the great majority of people, they've heard that, it didn't pan out, it didn't bear fruit, and they don't want to hear much about it. Maybe the occasional joke or whatever, but you never know. These people are divorced from reality. I mean, like Nancy Pelosi still thinks, like, for example, they pro-Palestinian
the
protesters are being directed
funded by Putin.
Right.
Yeah, right.
Right. And I think just like it was just a few weeks ago that Nancy Pelosi and Hillary Clinton were saying, like, they're talking, having a conversation, and said, like, what is it that Putin has on Trump? So they still believe it.
Right.
So there are these people, powerful people, in the establishment that still are obsessed with it. But I don't think they can, they're going to be able to carry it very far.
Right. Well, I mean, in my mind, this war in Ukraine is essentially over. It's Avdiivka was really the last super fortified bastion of defense, and Russia took it in just a couple weeks. It seemed like it was a long process, but towards the end, it really
it unraveled very quickly.
Right. It once it started going, it was gone. It felt like, and it just
I know, and it seems like there are a lot of signs that the Russian advantage is growing, is at an accelerating pace. It's just every day now you hear about a new air defense system, a Patriot missile system or whatever, that's been wiped out. That was a rare event, up until a few weeks ago.
Something like 3 got wiped out in a day.
Yeah, right. Now it's
each one of those are something like 1.3 billion.
Right, it's extraordinary. So, I think you never know how long these. A country can hold out. Germany was clearly going to lose after the Battle of Kursk, but then it hung on for another couple of years, and they killed a lot of Russians as they retreated, back to Germany. It could be still some months, a year and a half, I don't know. But yeah, I think there's no question that the Russians are gonna win resoundingly. And then the big question is, will Macron's plans actually be put into effect? Will the Western countries intervene? And there's a risk, but I just don't think so.
There'll be riots on the street.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to go to Ukraine and die.
Right.
Everybody knows that there's more to this story than what the mainstream media, the majority of people, I would say.
Yeah.
A lot of, you don't have to love Russia, but there's a lot of people that are, they start looking into it a little bit, like, okay, this is a little bit confusing, especially if all you have to do is go back to 2014 and you just do a little bit of research and be like, wait a second, we funded a coup that overthrew the democratically elected government of Ukraine, and there's a voice recording of Victoria Nuland selecting the new cabinet members for this new government, and lo and behold, they all became in the powers that she was saying.
Right.
So
well, they selected the new leader, and there he was. And in fact, it was more than that. I mean, it's clear that the Americans selected the leadership, but also some of the top positions were actually filled by American citizens. I mean, it was just the Americans, in a way, just took over a good part of Ukraine. And then, we've heard what the CIA rebuilt their intelligence service, and had all those bunkers right along the Russian border. And so it was.
I feel like the only way this could have worked is if it was done very, very quickly. If somehow that they pushed Russia back very quickly at the end and ended this conflict quickly and held on to everything, maybe let go of Crimea, then potentially this could have ended. Because the longer that this is playing out, the more time people have to understand a bit more about this conflict and this narrative, and the more and more support I feel like they will lose for Ukraine, right? I mean, and that's my opinion.
Well, that seems to be the trend. I mean, support for
same thing with Israel and Gaza.
Right.
These things have to be done quickly. I feel like
right.
Because in the beginning, when it first happened, all over the media, unprovoked invasion by Russia into Ukraine.
Right. People waving the blue and yellow flags.
Right, and in the beginning, I knew a little bit about what was going on, but the unprovoked in it I knew wasn't true. But I could kind of see in the beginning, most people have no idea about 2014.
Right.
They have no idea really about this conflict. It's just like, bad man Putin rolling into the Ukraine and just crushing these poor Ukrainians.
Right.
And then you realize, wait, they're Russian-speaking people here that they voted to leave Ukraine, and they've been bombed for 10 years.
Right. And actually, Russia was trying to work to make
the Minsk agreements
to actually return them to Ukraine. That was the idea. Was that that they would be actually under the central Ukrainian government, but they would have but would enjoy a certain amount of sovereignty, similar, I guess, to a Swiss canton or something. It would be a federal system. Anyway, that didn't happen, and when it broke out, I too kind of had very, very mixed feelings, and I guess in a way I still do have mixed feelings. I mean, the war is a terrible thing, and but it's become clear. It wasn't clear what was happening in the first few weeks, in the first couple months, but it's become clear since then what happened. And that, well, first of all, that the Russians went in with a very limited force. They were not trying to take over Ukraine. They couldn't possibly with the number of men that they had. And then second, that they were immediately negotiating, and the negotiations were making real progress. I'd heard about that, but I almost had trouble believing it. But since then, there's so many people that have come out,
including Ukrainians themselves.
Yeah, right. Even the negotiators, the Ukrainian, high-level Ukrainian officials have said, in fact, we did.
We had a deal on the line.
We had a deal, right?
And Boris Johnson came.
Yeah, so you look at that and you say, well, Putin almost pulled off a miracle. I mean, it seemed, you look like, what's this man doing? He almost, was able to settle everything at that point, or maybe it wasn't settle everything, but to take a real step towards a peaceful settlement. Mm-hmm. And the war could have ended at that point. It really could have. It could have been very limited, and so you can see that clearly. At the time, it wasn't so clear, and so there was this really intense anti-Ukrainian feeling, confusion among other people like myself, but that diehard pro-Ukrainian crowd, I think, is growing smaller and smaller and smaller with every passing day now, and there's just not going to be any real support for boots on the ground, Western boots on the ground in Ukraine.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, one last question actually. Do you would you say that the Russian military is more powerful than the United States military at this point? If you're just giving it an honest assessment.
Well, I guess it kind of depends on which of the armed forces you're looking at. I would say definitely, the Russian army, I believe, is probably significantly more powerful than the U.S. Army. The Air Force. Well, that's kind of an open question. And you say, okay, the U.S. has a lot of very good planes. Yeah, I think they have more planes than the Russians have. I think it's generally, acknowledged that they are superior in the air. But the Russians have by far the best air defense system, so they can neutralize that. And then I think maybe the only one of the armed forces where the Americans have a real clear advantage is the Navy. Their navies.
Yeah, we got that Admiral Rachel Levine. Yeah. She strikes fear in the hearts of
right. But the thing is,
sailors all around the world.
When it comes to like a war in Russia, the Navy really doesn't have much of a role. It just doesn't. Right. And then it also seems that navies maybe are kind of becoming obsolete. A thing of the past, right?
You got hypersonic missiles that can just knock them out of the water.
Yeah, and these sea drones are very effective. Just a sea drone that costs $100,000, or one hypersonic missile that costs $1 million or whatever, can take out an aircraft carrier or a battleship, which is going to cost hundreds of millions.
Well, I guess we can say at least that this question is in contention. Which military is more powerful? This would never have been even up for debate, I think, before the Russian invasion.
Right.
But what we've seen is that Russia has been able to pick apart basically, anything that we've given to Ukraine and thrown at them. Their military has proven that they're able to adapt and evolve to Western weaponry. Right. So, but our Western weaponry hasn't adapted to stop the Russian offensive weapons. Russia also has a larger nuclear arsenal.
Right.
Russia also has hypersonic missiles, which we do not have. Right. It seems like our these Patriot missile systems, we can't produce things at scale. We can't produce artillery shells. What Russia's outproducing us 10-1 on something like this.
Yeah, I guess just today they said that Europe and the U.S. combined can only produce 1/3 of what the Russians are producing. It's probably a lot more than that.
So,
to be honest, but even even the West is admitting that.
So, even we say 1/3, that's a huge disparity.
Yeah.
And the cost of producing our munitions as well is so much higher.
Right.
Russia exports steel. We import steel. We can't even. We don't have the capabilities to produce.
Right. We're getting to the industrial aspect because we were talking about like the standing armies or whatever. But what's become clear from this Ukraine war is that wars of the future are kind of like much more like the First World War in
wars
some ways.
Wars of attrition.
They're wars of attrition and it's industrial capacity that can really decide who's the victor. In
World War II, we were a manufacturing powerhouse. Not anymore. We don't produce anything. And so for me, it's just absolute insanity to think that we would want to provoke countries like China.
Right.
If Russia's outproducing us by our own admission 3-1 on munitions, China's going to do 300-1. And everything's made in China.
Right. Yeah. Well, you think, I don't know, that's some people. You would think, for example, in the Pentagon would see that. I think some do.
So then I'll ask the question one more time. Obviously, you can hear my bias. I believe that from this conflict, I believe that the Russian military is currently the most powerful military in the world. They have shown their ability to adapt, the ability to produce, also just better general strategy. You look at at what we did with Ukraine, the most telegraphed counteroffensive in the world. Just tell them, hey, Russia, we're coming right here, right now, and we're going to keep on pounding our heads against this wall.
Right.
And that was our great military stratagem.
Right. Yeah. Well, the fact that there was just all kinds of really absurdly optimistic, predictions about that great summer offensive of last year, but I guess we have to admit that the establishment recognizes that they failed. I mean, that maybe is why Victoria Nuland is no longer with, in the State Department. There is some recognition that went very wrong, and that, that their projections were absurdly optimistic. And so there may be, we hope that there's some sort of growing realism and respect for the Russians. There used to be this really reckless disregard for the Russians, and I think that that's probably starting to ebb away, which would be good. That may be what's going to save us from World War III.
Have some fear and realize.
Yeah,
that,
I think it was the lack of fear. See, during the Cold War years, there was a healthy fear and respect of the Soviet Union, and so we took them seriously. We had to pay attention to what to their
military capabilities.
Yeah, but then also, when we negotiated with them, they negotiated from a position of strength, and you had to compromise. You couldn't just dictate to them.
Look them at peers, but we're not used to doing that anymore.
It's just like we still like to imagine that Russia is the Russia of the 1990s, and we can simply dictate, the terms to them. Mm-hmm. And we've been trying to do that, and and that's really why this war broke out in 2022. The Russians came and say, "Hey, we're really serious. We got to talk about this," and we just said, "No, we're not talking. We're not going to negotiate on this. You go to hell," and that's how the war broke out, really. And but now I think, they assumed again that Russia was going to collapse, and it didn't. There's a military war, but the economic war, and then both of them have to be a real disappointment for the American establishment, a shock, and maybe that shock is starting to wake them up. That's all we can hope for. I'm not sure, because again, these people seem to have such a poor grasp of reality. You just don't know. Maybe they're going to go in the Macron direction and start become even more reckless. But we can hope that they won't.
Well, if troops get sent, if they try to send troops, I personally believe that there will just be too much civil unrest from something like that it just won't happen.
Yeah.
I just don't see it happening. I hope so.
I think you're right.
I'm not going. That's for damn sure.
Yeah. Well, neither am I. But if I was in Ukraine, I might be in a trench somewhere now.
Right. For real.
Here are these 60-year-old guys there. I say, oh gosh, this is.
Okay, so your answer then, just going back, do you believe that Russia has a stronger military than the United States now?
I guess, if you look at it, I went through the different branches of the armed services, and I say overall, and I think it's because in the end, it's just like the wars of the future. It looked like, if this is any indication of the war we're looking at right now, they're decided by
industrial capacity,
and fought on land, navies. We have the world's largest navy. Well, maybe until recently, I think the Chinese may be catching up and passing us when it comes to navies. But anyway, our navy's a lot bigger than that. But that just may not mean anything anymore. So, looking at a real war, I think, Russia has the upper hand.
Really? Okay, you guys heard it here first. America's number 2, or maybe number 3, behind China. Who knows? Okay. All right, thanks, Dad.